everyone, and welcome to Sunday Studio. It's time to paint, and I'm going to paint for you a demo that illustrates the concept of warm and cool. And I chose for the subject a poppy meadow. Right here, can you see it? And the reason why I selected poppy meadow is because it uses predominantly warm and cool. Well, it uses both. And so I can really show you how I use temperature to create a feeling of depth in a meadow. And creating depth is one way that we use color temperature. If you are still a little fuzzy on your understanding of color temperature, I'm going to refer you to the video that I just posted this week on understanding and using color temperature, as well as the podcast last week. And just know it will come to you, I promise you. So I'm going to just get right into the demo today. Here's my reference photo, and I'm going to these are just some examples that I used of poppies. I'll post these so you can see them up close. Now, I went ahead and I selected my pastels in advance, which is what I like to do. I probably picked more reds than I'm going to use, but I really wanted to show you how I arranged them on my tray from cool and dark to warmer. So you see here, these are the more, I call them brick reds, or reds that have more of a violet in them or blue in them. And as we come forward, these reds start to have more yellow and orange into them. And then these are just lighter values of red, so they're pinks. In the greens, here are the blue greens. These are the distant greens, or the shadow greens. As I come forward, you see that the greens start to change, and they get what I like to call more earthy. They have more yellows in them. They look browner, right? They look more naturally sunnier green. So they go over in the warm section. These are just some paler greens, and these are what I call spicy greens. These are going to be the greens that, doesn't really matter if they're warm or cool, I'll use them anywhere to give a little punch. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and get started, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use a new pastel to just simply do my quick drawing. It's a very simple subject, which sometimes those can be tricky. It's going to be about the meadow, so I'm raising the horizon, and there's some distant kind of tree shapes. And in my photo, they are very boring. They just go across like a big giant snake. And so I'm going to change it up a little bit and make some of those bush shapes give a little variety to them, and maybe I'll even let's throw in a distant mountain, and that will help us play with the color temperature a little bit more. And then I have to deal with this whole big expanse of grass that's filled with flowers. So I want to be able to pull the eye through this meadow. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw kind of an imaginary zigzag pathway. And this is going to help remind me that when I arrange my flower shapes, I want them to be able to pull the viewer's eye into the painting. I'm going to now just take this new pastel. I'm going to keep it very simple as far as my blocking. And just all the dark shapes, I'm going to block them in with this dark blue. And I'm also going to darken in this suggested pathway that I invented. It's not really there. In the photo, it's dark all along the whole foreground, which I'm going to do as well. But I am taking out my artistic license and creating this pathway to pull the eye back into the painting. Now, there's a couple things I could do next. I could just go ahead and start painting, but I think it's going to be better if I have a color underneath underneath the layers that I'm going to put down, meaning I need to tone this light colored paper a little bit, and I think it'll be just the best thing I can do is use some red. So basically where I have paper showing, I'm going to use some red, and then up in the sky I'll use a lighter value of the red, which is pinkish color. And then I'm going to take the next step and I'm going to blend all of this in. And if you've seen my videos before, actually I'm going to take another step and put blue in that mountain, because I don't want to forget that I put it in there. If you've seen my videos before, you know that if I had, well, I'm working on very light paper, and this is UArt paper, by the way, that I like to blend in the first layer. And I blend in the first layer so I get rid of all the light spots. Because what the light spots tend to do is peek through the painting and get distracting. And then we end up adding so much pastel to cover it up that we sometimes start creating mud, which we don't want to do. So I'm blending it all in. Here I'm going to blend in my distant tree line, like so. And now I'm ready to start the painting. And now I don't have to fight all those little light bits that would have been coming through. So the first thing that I'm going to do is reinforce those dark areas. And I've got dark bushes in the background, but because they're in the distance, I have to use cooler blues. So I'm actually using a blue-green. I have a couple of different blue-greens. This one's a little bit lighter, so I'm going to use both of them for those distant trees. If I want something to go even further back, I'm going to use an even lighter blue-green. So I'm going to go ahead and cover that little mountain shape with a lighter blue-green, like that. All right, the next thing that I want to do, and I might come back and adjust those, but for now I'm going to leave them alone. And remember, those are not the important part of the painting, the flowers are. So these just need to be interesting shapes, but without a lot of detail. Now I want to add some, that's a blue, I'm going to add some blue into this pathway just to reinforce the darkness of it. Alright, so there's my pathway. And I'm going to add that blue-green on top of the blue. This is just so I can start to establish that there's a kind of a dark shadowy area underneath all the flowers and in the foreground. Okay, and now I have all the darks in place. So the next thing that I want to do, actually this is a terrible shape. See this funny looking shape? There's a couple things wrong with it. One, it ends equal right at the top of that mountain, right? So it looks funny that way. That's called a tangent. So what I need to do is I need to change the shape. And I'm going to change the shape while I'm thinking of it instead of waiting and then I'll forget about it. And I'm going to use that distant mountain color to carve into it to make it a more interesting shape. All right, so now I'm going to address the light area of the painting, which happens to be the sky. And I decided, because in the photo there's no color to it, I decided I wanted to make it a nice kind of sunny blue sky day. So I selected several blue pastels, and I'm just simply going back and forth and letting them blend themselves. As it gets lower in the horizon, I think I'm going to keep that little bit of pink glow. So it gives a little atmosphere to the scene. And I'm going to use that same pink to carve that distant tree shape to make it a little bit more interesting. Like that. Alright, now I'm going to move forward. Now here's what I like to do when I am painting a meadow like this, and I'm using especially when I'm using a lot of green, and in this case I'm also using a lot of red. I want to remember that in the distance those colors are going to be lighter and they're also going to be cooler. So I'm going to first start by laying down some cooler reds. What is a cool red? A cool red or duller red doesn't have as much yellow in it. So I consider a salmon color a cooler red. So I'm going to go in with that salmon color and start to put it down. Now this, if you notice, I'm creating linear marks. So I'm using the side of my pastel like this. And in the distance they are narrow bands, but as I come forward, they can start to get wider. This is another way that we create depth, which we will be getting into. I'm going to intensify the red that I use in this area. Notice I'm going over my suggested pathway, and I'm doing this because I want it to be, well, the word I used is suggested. I don't want it to be right in your face. In other words, I want it to be subtle. I want it to subtly guide you by the darkness of it, but I don't want to see a dark path. So I'm trying to be suggestive with that. All right, so I'm going to stop there with the reds. Now I'm going to introduce the greens. So remember, the greens in the distance need to be cooler. So I've got to go to my cooler section right over here on my tray. As you can see, these ones over here. So I'm going to start with this very light, kind of coolish. I would consider it a light. It almost looks like it could be a yellow green, but when I put it next to the reds in the that I already laid down, all of a sudden it becomes cooler. That's the simultaneous contrast. I have another. This is a very, very light, dull blue-green, and I'm kind of mixing it in. I want some of the red to show because I want it to feel like there's little tiny poppies way in the distance. Here's another lighter and cooler green. Again, all in the distance. This is a warmer, more yellowy green, and I'm going to just put some of it in just to break up some of the red, which are going to be the poppies. When I'm painting masses of flowers, what I like to do first is establish the mass, and then I put in individual flowers. So notice I put in big areas of red. Those are the masses, and I will then pull out individual flower shapes as I move on in the painting. Now another thing that I need to do is when I start to come forward, I'm going to start to use warmer greens. So I'm going to start to use the greens that have more yellow in them. And so I'm using the greens that are on this side of my tray, which are the more yellowy greens. I'm also changing the direction of my marks. And as I'm putting down marks in this foreground area, notice I'm making my marks up and down. Because now I start to see the front of the grasses, whereas in the distance I don't see the front of the grasses, I'm only able to see the tops of the grasses. And I start somewhere in the middle, shifting from horizontal marks to vertical marks. And it makes it very easy when you've already selected out your colors to come in and just pick up the colors that you need. Now, notice I just added a green here, and I don't know if you can tell on the video, but this is a cooler, bluer green. And the reason why I'm putting it down here is because this area in the foreground is in darker shadowed area. For whatever reason, and I'm not sure, this area was darker and in shadow. So I'm establishing the cooler greens there, but I'm going to add the warmer greens kind of poking on top, breaking it up a little bit. Now I see that I have this area here that I kind of neglected, and it's sort of in the middle, so I'm going to use a green that I consider my middle ground green, meaning it can go either way. This green here, you can see it. That green is what I call a true grass green, and it really can go either way. If I put something warmer next to it, look how cool it is, right? If I put something cooler next to it, look how warm it is. That's the perfect example here of simultaneous contrast. So I can use this green in the middle as a good transitionary green. All right? So now what I've got is I've got lighter and cooler in the distance, kind of transitioning to warmer, more yellowy greens in the foreground. I have suggestions of a cooler, duller, kind of salmony pink in the distance for the distant reds. But as I come forward, I can get more intense and warmer. So what I'm going to do now is put in some individual poppies. And I'm going to start with my cooler, kind of, I call this the brick red. And here I'm using the side of my stick to make kind of chunky marks. Another thing that happens in aerial perspective is that the shapes are going to get smaller as I go back. So if I'm going to have some poppies going into the distance, those poppies are going to have to get smaller as they go into the distance. And I'm kind of following that imaginary suggested pathway that I created. And I'm going to then pick up that salmon pink that I had and put little tiny dots. Oops, that's too big. Wouldn't be that big. In the distance. And now you can see that the eye will follow these poppies as they come forward. Now I want to give them a little bit of light, so I'm going to use a orangey red. So this is a warmer red to suggest some light on some of the edges of those poppy shapes. And the thing is, when you're painting meadows of flowers, it's real easy to just get polka dotty, where you put them everywhere. But I want you to really be mindful of where you put them and say, okay, how is the eye going to follow these shapes as they go into the distance? And that's going to help, oops, you press so hard it breaks. That's going to help you have a more interesting design. So I've got warmer reds to cooler reds. And then finally, I'm going to just add a few of those. Remember I talked about those spicy greens? Where I want the eye to go, I'm going to put in some of those really nice pops of light. Put some back there so that your eye goes back to that tree. And then finally, I would take out my grass box and start to just come in and create a little bit more interest with some linear marks. If I put in a few pieces of grass, your eye will fill in the rest and it'll suggest the rest. Alright, so I hope this little demo has helped you have a firmer grasp on the idea of using warm and cool. And when you use it properly, you start to see it more clearly. And thank you.